coming back to not always perfect time. Remember when you didn't have to be perfectly on time for everything? Like now everyone's got like these phones that operate.
I mean, I remember when you didn't have to be perfectly on time to everything. No.
I actually resent being on time.
Yeah.
Especially in like social situations.
You're a good non-American.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like we're now in this world where like exact time matters. Whereas like we've both been in cultures where if you didn't turn up.
This has been tested.
I'm testing it for you right now. We're talking about the milk. Drinking tea, because this is our last Guys Drinking Tea podcast. Is that right?
I don't want to make any promises.
We're planning on moving to a new set next week.
New set and new title.
Maybe a new title.
And let's be honest, like I've never rebranded a podcast, so if there's any issues with that, hopefully we don't like lose all of you. So like this might be goodbye forever.
I'm concerned that neither of us know anything about running a podcast. So maybe that's why it works.
Well, I know.
I don't have the microphone anywhere near me. This is like the microphone's like 4 feet away. So if you didn't hear anything I said, which is possible, I apologize.
That is also possible. Yeah, and I'm so loopy right now that I can't even like correct things. I know how to like set up lighting and make sound work.
Okay. That's a lot
and that's about the most effort I've put into how to run a podcast.
But we have, I mean, we love that you guys out there listen. We don't know who all of you are, but I had a wonderful conversation with someone the other day who said, you know, my favorite thing about South is the podcast. And Aaron and I both put a lot of hours into Sunday morning and different things in the week.
I don't put a lot of hours into Sunday. What are you talking about?
So
I
then
just slap it together.
Yeah. So then the conversation was this little podcast that we get like 10 minutes of thinking time around is someone's favorite thing was kind of hilarious.
Well, all right. I'm gonna rein that statement back in a little bit.
The Sunday morning statement.
Yeah, no, the 10 minutes of thinking.
Okay.
This podcast represents a reasonable amount of study on your part.
Yes.
And a lifetime of study on your part and my part in various things related to Jesus and such. And then all the other meanderings, that's just a byproduct that you get to reap the harvest of.
Yeah. So a couple of caveats on this week's podcast. Yes, it might be the last one with tea, but most of you won't know that because you listen on podcast and the tea isn't really present on podcast. If you watch on video, you might miss things like my delicate cup that was bought for me by a wonderful lady called Lydia Greenhalgh, who comes to South, and she bought it for me the week that the Queen's funeral took place. And she said, I feel like you might need to be really sentimental and sit drinking tea while watching the funeral. So I want to help with that. So she gave me some tea bags. And
that's so sweet.
It was so sweet. And so you might miss things like that, but the same conversations will take place. And Aaron is coming off the back of sickness. And so I'm braving like...
Yeah, this is how brave your leader is, that he would actually spend... hopefully not an hour, but a long period of time in a confined space with a recovering ill person.
Yeah. Well, it's fine. Because we spent time together before you were sick and I didn't get sick. So it seems like it's fine. So this week we are talking about, we began a series at South designed to
solve all the problems of the universe.
So it's a vision series, and it's designed around giving some pathways for how we live out the way of Jesus with the heart of Jesus. So that's what we are about as a community. That's the simple way that we describe what we do. We're living in the way of Jesus with the heart of Jesus, and then wanting to give that some more like practical. I guess the word is guidelines. When you're trying to create vision pathways, vision statements, vision language. I think somewhere you're trying to be restrictive enough that people have a sense of what you're passionate about as a community, but broad enough that people can live out their passion. It's a complex place to land. And so we started with the first week this week, and yeah, at the same time, I think maybe an interesting starting point for us is I did say on Sunday, like, I think vision is a little bit like travel. sometimes like the easiest part is planning it or thinking about what you want to do. And then when you actually get into the mode of traveling, it can actually get a little less uncomfortable. Like I'd be intrigued as to you're a taller guy than I am.
Yes.
Like, so when you dream about going to a place, unless you get to travel first class, even just being on a plane must be, I mean, it's a bad experience for me, and I'm just over 6 foot. And you're like 6'4". Like, what?
Yeah,
that can't be good.
Yeah, when I travel, it is not the most comfortable thing in the world, but and I've done a lot of travel because I grew up overseas and we were flying all over the place all my childhood and that sort of thing. I think that the advantage I have when it comes to travel is being a third culture kid or a missionary kid. There's something about traveling that's like core to my identity.
Yeah.
And so I love it so much. And I even love the airplane part of it and the airport part of it almost as much as the destination. And maybe there's even like some research that third culture kids, one of the happiest places on earth for them is an airport because it's not where you're coming from and it's not where you're headed. And so I think all of that mixed up with how tall I am, I just sort of like overcome it or something like that.
I have a theory. The only people that are happy in an airport are people with lounge passes. Like, I don't believe anyone's happy in an airport.
I love being in an airport. I love it. I love airports.
Oh man! And my kids are two culture kids, and not third culture kids. They live in a culture that isn't mine, but it is their mum's. So they've traveled since before they can remember. I mean, I tried to work out how many times they've crossed the Atlantic the other day, and I just got lost. So they've traveled a lot, and I would say they probably love travel. And my second daughter, Gigi, I think it was last time we were flying maybe to Michigan, we're hitting a bunch of bumps coming down. It's really like just one of those flights that you see people gripping hold of stuff a little tighter. And Gigi's just like staring out the window and like, this is amazing. It feels like we're falling. And all the people around her are like, oh my goodness. Yes, it does. So they I guess would resonate a little bit with that. But yeah, it's.
Which just like means that your illustration of vision is like traveling.
Doesn't work for you.
Doesn't work for me because I'm just very comfortable in the monotony of the airport.
Let's get to the.
I will get nowhere ever.
Yeah, that's fair. So it is, yeah. For me, like the analogy is really like certainly the hard part happens once you get going, because when do you see results? When do you see it work? When do you know it was the right vision? When do you know it actually people have caught hold of it? And I mean, as someone who develops a vision, you actually probably believe in it more intrinsically than anybody else, whereas other people might be waiting more for proof that it actually matters or works, or many convincing. So even for me, like we started this week with a piece of language that I just threw together or pulled together from my own meanderings maybe 6 months ago. What does it look like for the church to create environments that feel like coming home? And that was based out of a couple of things. I am someone who's left home, so I know the absence of home, which is going to be a part of my life forever, I would suspect. And knowing when you're home is fascinating. And I guess you would have similar stories, right? I mean, like, where is home for you?
That's even more complicated for a third culture kid, right?
Yeah. Is home Rwanda, where you were born? Is home the different places that you've lived? Is home, yeah. So like that homesickness at times, reflecting on just weird ways that being a British person in America has impacted me. And this isn't to like assign good or bad to a culture, but even just to recognize, like, there's been times where I'll see something and I'll say, oh, that's deeply American and it's very un-British. And that's fine because I'm in America, but it's still for me a personal sense of that doesn't feel normal. I feel out of place. And then experiencing the welcome of coming home, and how excited people are. So wanting to create a church culture that says when people walk through the door, this is a celebration, whether it's for the 400th time or for the first time. Like, we are excited that people are present. And that might be true of other people about me as well. Like, that's what a community can do. It can gather people in a way that is excited, and that we can have that place that feels like we belong. And that really is predicated on, well, isn't that who Jesus is? Like that to me is one of the most compelling things about Jesus. His ability to make people feel like they belonged.
So what is it about Jesus that you think caused him to create that experience for people?
Wow. So I guess, like,
because, like,
how deep do we want to go with that? Because that feels like a deep dive.
So deep.
Yeah, we're gonna go into the deep dives. We're gonna go underwater.
Super deep. Well, because I mean, like, you know, this particular facet or pathway of the Vision for South, which is this series, is about what are we gonna, as a community, try and lean into becoming in this next season of our community, so that we can be who God's called us to be as a local church. And so this particular facet is going to manifest itself in a couple different ways. You know, it's going to manifest itself in maybe even like how our spaces look and feel.
Absolutely.
It's going to manifest itself in our posture of welcoming people and inviting people into spaces. It's going to manifest itself in those sorts of things. But when Jesus did this, was it the spaces that he created?
I would say to a degree, yes.
Was it the kinds of conversations he had? So, like,
let's unpack. So really, at its deep core, if we're going to get philosophical, which we do regularly, I guess, on this podcast, or at least theological. So fundamentally, the beauty of a faith that is Trinitarian, and if that word's new to you, it's the idea that God is Father, Son, and Spirit. And there's some great theological writers that would say when Jesus says, baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, he's giving God a new name. So he's saying in the Old Testament, God was known as Yahweh. In this time, he's known as Father, Son, and Spirit. So in that respect, God is inherently relational and has always been relational. So it's not one person existing for their own sake. It is the cost of relationship in threes. Even a relationship between two people can be inherently kind of selfish. Like, it's just the two of you, and like three involves a different dynamic. So inherently, God is relational, and Jesus steps out of relationship, at least in the everyday sense that it was there before. So that was some of my theory on Sunday. Like, I just wonder, was Jesus a deeply homesick person? Was that a constant feeling for him, emotion for him on earth? I'm away from the thing that most naturally feels like home, because I'm out of that constant communion. So God is inherently relational, and in Genesis, we're told makes man for relationship, both with him and with others. And so that relational belonging is at the heartbeat of God and everything he makes. So it makes sense then that Jesus on earth tries to gather people into those kind of relationships. And so then it looks different, maybe because the spaces are different. And for us as a church community, yes, it does get very practical. We're just doing a new floor in the foyer gathering area. And the first iteration someone suggested was like I don't know, what's that floor that you kind of put down that kind of looks like hardwood? I don't know if it's laminate or whatever. But it was like, so my question was immediately, does that feel like home? Like, does that, like, you imagine like 300 heels clacking around on Sunday morning? Does that feel like a space that feels like home? And to me, it doesn't. So like my lens for looking at that was like, let's create an environment that feels home-like, feels like home. Jesus, it's harder to imagine him having that sort of spatial control and investing resources in those kind of things. But when you think about the table as the heartbeat of society in the first century, that's where he spends a lot of his time. And he spends it with people that don't necessarily have that sense of belonging. And he creates it for them. So if he spends time at tables trying to help people belong, like us mirroring him has a modern day application that may not physically be a table, but it has some kind of practical emphasis. And so I heard someone say just the other day, if you take every story about mountains and tables out of the Bible, it reduces its like content by like 2/3. Like so much of the conversation is either at a mountain or a table.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And with Jesus, he's, you know, in Luke, we talked about this when we did the series on Luke. Like,
so potluck every Sunday.
Yeah, maybe. Like, I would love that. I'd be all for that. Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or leaving a meal. Like that's almost every single story in Luke. So he's a God that spends time with people in a way that other religious leaders didn't. They spent time with other religious leaders. But he has a way of inviting people into relationship, and they can belong before anything happens, and I love that. I mean, that to me is intriguing.
Yeah. So I think the other element, like call it theologically or just to the reality that Jesus has the ability to do this differently than anyone else, even than we have by ourselves, which actually this will spill into this coming week.
Yes.
But is we were made for this kind of community with God. So like your soul, your body, your mind, everything about who you are as a person was designed to fit and find its completion and its culmination in relationship with the living God. And so when you actually step into that relationship, it feels like coming home.
Yeah.
It's like a puzzle that finally has found its place in the grand scheme of things. And so so like part of what Jesus brought when he came and he walked this earth is he brought heaven to earth and reunited what always should have been between humanity and God. And it felt everywhere he went, you just heard story after story after story from the Gospels of him basically making that alignment for people. And it's like this massive feeling of like arriving home.
Yeah. And
this is what I was always made for.
And this is what intrigues me, and as you say, it relates to this week, as we like this week, little snippet, little whatever, little reason you don't need to come to church. No, I'm joking. I need to come. Little like forward thinking. There is this like idea that we want to plan experiences. And as I said earlier, we do spend a lot of time thinking about Sunday morning. We have small group leaders that think a lot of time about their small groups that they run. We have food pantry people that think spend a lot of time thinking about the environment that people work, all those different things. There's a lot of planning of experiences, and yet like longing to create space for people to meet with a risen Jesus, whatever that looks like for them in that moment. And that's complex because our backgrounds, all our different theological wrestlings, they all speak into that. And then the idea that Jesus always invites you to some kind of next step. Like the passage we'll wrestle with, Mark chapter 5, is at its heart one that is about who's clean and unclean, and what does that mean for your ability to come into relationship or to experience God. And so like the stories in in Mark chapter 5 are full of people that are unclean for all sorts of different reasons, who do encounter God, who do stand in the presence of the divine, and a whole bunch of people who probably thought they shouldn't. Now, what's fascinating to me is the number of stories, maybe not in Mark chapter 5, maybe in other places, the number of times that people knew that instinctively before they knew it theologically. So yes, there is the theological unpacking of why Jesus was able to connect with them and invite them in, but multiple times they knew it beforehand. Like 5,000 people stand on a mountainside. Why? Because something has instinctively told them this person has a way of speaking about God and connecting us to God that we have not heard before. That's the magic. That's the wonder of Jesus for me as a spiritual leader. The sense of I feel connected to this person. And that's why I love it when people come into environments at South, in other churches that I've been at, and say, I don't know why, but I just feel like I belong here. I feel safe here. I feel like I can sit here and with all my questions, with all my doubts, with all my anger, with all of my whatever, and I can be here. So I'm always intrigued by people that come and sit. And someone said to me a while back, they'd been through a lot of different stuff. They were coming to South and they said, I love how you talk about Jesus and what you have in your faith. I want that, but there's all this other stuff. How long is it going to take for me to get to where you are? And my answer was, I don't know. I don't know, but you're free to stay here as long as you need to find that. Like, and if that for you is in that for you is sitting in the back of the church, kind of semi-connected, that's probably okay. If that for you is, I have all of these different questions and I'm not going to be the person like, and I love how we have different people that worship in different ways, that sing in different ways, but I'm not going to be the person that's like, you know, moving a little, hands in the air. Like, that's not who I am. I'm too beaten up for that. I'm too hurt for that. Like, creating those spaces where those people can come and just be part of something because they know they can belong. And that's why I think that Maya Angelou quote I used on Sunday intrigued me. And it's something like every single one of us has a longing for home, that's specifically a longing for a space we can be with no questions asked. And I think that intrigues me. Like, as a first step into community, what can you walk into? How messy can you be before the church is like, no, we can't have you in here? It feels like it should be very messy, if ever.
Yeah, and yet, which is again, coming into this next week, Jesus also has this ability, and maybe this, I don't know if this is where an illustration breaks down, because, you know, even when we talked about this as a staff, whether we use this terminology, whether it's like coming home, well, different people have different experiences from coming home. Sometimes the idea of home is scary and not a comfortable place. But we figured that y'all are smart enough to know what we mean by that, in the sense that even if your home life experience was pretty horrible, you know what you long for from a home
and that's experience. The Maya Angelou thing, right? Exactly. Like, yeah, you don't need to have had it to want it.
Exactly. And so, but there's something unique about Jesus in the way he interacts with people, where he accepts people unequivocally and yet never leaves them where they are.
And then yet.
So how do we do that as a church community, where you're like, our starting point is you are loved by God, and therefore, and we love you too, and you are 100% accepted here, and you can sit in the back and be where you are, and that's totally fine, and we're not going to threaten you and all. And then at the same time, you know, I love that song. One of my favorite songs is that As You Find Me. And it's got that phrase in it. The first half of the song, maybe even more than the first half, the first 2/3 is like, you love me as you find me. I was this and I was that, and you loved me anyway. I was this and I was that. But then it breaks into this bridge that, musically speaking, I actually think is one of the weaker parts of the song. But
can we bring the
theologically, it is so profound, because it says, as you find me. And then it says this, your love's too good to leave me here.
And yet, so here's my intrigue with that. It's too good to leave you there, but how long will it let you stay there? And so I'm always intrigued by what is the iteration 1 church community. Like, maybe it's the church in Acts, but maybe it's the church, maybe it's the group of disciples as well, before they ever really know they're a church. Like, Jesus gathers them, they are in community together, they know that they're in some rabbi-type student relationship, very common for the first century in Israel, and yet, like, something's different. It's clearly different. Jesus talks like other rabbis don't talk, and he talks far more about himself, interestingly, than most rabbis would, which is what makes him different. And so, like, you think
he's saying less of the Bible says this and the Bible says that. And he's saying a little bit more of I say this and I say that, which, again, I don't know, man.
And
what a controversial character.
Every other rabbi's quoting other rabbis. Oh, you've heard Gamaliel say this. You've heard Hillel say that. Jesus is like, no, I'm saying. And it's the authority. So he captivates people, and I'm sure rubs a bunch of people up the wrong way. So they're in a community, and then their leader is taken and killed. And in the midst of that, some of them think he's come back to life again. One of them has denied him and still belongs to that community. Like, Peter's hanging out with the disciples, not openly repented yet, not made it up with Jesus, not any of those things, and they're all fishing together. Like, they're still together. Thomas is like, no, he's not raised. You guys are lying. Or you drank too much last night, or whatever. And he's still in the community. Like, these are people that are going through behavioral and belief trauma or mess, and they still belong to the community. Like, they're not outside of it. They're still accepted. Like, it's intriguing to me. Like, what would have happened to Judas had he stayed? Had he not committed suicide? Like, and that's a whole theological conundrum of itself. But, like, at least with Peter, who it seems like certainly some people saw him deny Jesus.
Still. But it's offset by the fact that he was at least close and he hadn't run away.
Who?
Right? Peter.
Yeah.
Maybe. So his sins are weighed out. One good action.
I don't know if that's true.
That's not how it works, huh?
For whatever reason, like, there's still, like, they're still there, and they're still around, and they still have space to belong, even when the belief and the behavior is a little bit all over the place. And I think that's what a church community can do well. I think it can create spaces.
So maybe a different way of phrasing the question or wrestling with this is, if his love is too good to leave us there, and so now somehow we're on the conversation of transformation, which is supposed to be for this coming week. So who knows what we're going to talk about next week?
Yeah, carefully planned podcast has become less planned.
It's being derailed. Is what would be Jesus's definition of transformation, desired transformation? Because I think that maybe that's where we get it wrong.
Well,
because how long can someone linger before being transformed by Jesus? Well, the answer is not even a nanosecond.
Yeah.
Depending on what you mean by transformation. Like, do they become upstanding citizens who don't make any mistakes anymore and who give to the poor and who, look like the stereotypical expectation of what society looks for in a really, really good human being? Oh, well, maybe never.
Yeah, that's the risk, right? I mean, like,
but are they transformed? Yes. And so what's the actual transformation marker that Jesus cares about that happens instantaneously and that happens and continues to happen
Yes.
in someone.
And the fascinating thing to me is whatever transformation you're experiencing, if you're not loving people more and loving God more, it's not real transformation. Like that. I mean, that's when Jesus wants to bring his gospel down to reduction, or how he sees the law down to the ultimate reduction. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. And maybe we could get into the philosophy of what did he mean by love? But certainly there was a way of treating people that changed, that he saw as transformation. And so there's a great quote from, I think it's Charles Spurgeon. Does he talk about something like about loving if you don't love your husband or your wife, I don't want to hear about the gospel of Jesus from you. Like I don't buy it. If you're not loving the people around you, don't preach at me, is almost his language. So that like transformation seems to be the core of the Jesus way. And
it is, but even that can turn into a duty that is not, that's not transformation driven.
Yeah.
So I think part of the transformation that Jesus produces, that is that experience that feels like coming home in his presence. And that's transformative in the sense that sense of arriving in the love of God, in the person, in like the ultimate expression of what it means to be human is in that restored relationship with God. If that's not in place, love of other isn't even possible.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that increasingly and returning, and we slide out of the puzzle spot and then we slide back in and then we slide back out and then we slide back, that ongoing journey of arriving back home in God's presence, in God's love, is the prerequisite to true love of
others. We're
like
Christian Rubik's cubes. Like, that piece used to be in place, now it feels like it's out of place. And it's eventually going to get back to in place. And so I think that the weakness of a lot of churches is that list of what order God works in. So like almost every church I've been in is pretty convinced God sorts out sexual sin before anything else. Like that's the thing he's going to work on. And we might go with like, okay, maybe. But maybe there's other stuff he's more concerned about in that person's life right now. And that might be okay. It might be okay.
Yeah.
So like how you hold the tension of like I love that South is and wants to be and increasingly will be a community where anybody with any baggage of any kind can come and gather and sit and look and wait and hope for God to show up, even if they're not sure anyone's coming. Like that's the mystery of it all. Like there's a wonderful book called Waiting for Godot by man, I'm blanking on the name now. It'll come back to me. And in these two characters are waiting for this person Godot to show up, and it's obviously a play on the word God. And at one point, one of the characters stands up and it's like, it's terrible. Like nobody ever comes, nothing ever happens. We just wait and we wait and we wait, and it's just there's nothing. And then of course there's the moment the character does turn up. And that can be church at times. Like it's a space where you wait and you wait and you wait, and God may be present because he's always present when followers of Jesus gather, but there's different times where he becomes very present to a particular person in a particular way. Yeah. That is transformative. Like being a space where you can wait for that and hope for that is so important to me. And yet there's a tension between that and saying, yes, walk in however you are on week 1, but what about when it's like week 172? And if nothing's changed, like, is that the purpose? And I have so many questions about that. Like,
yeah,
if you can sit in God's presence and ultimately nothing changes, what's going on there? Like, and for us as an organization, not just for the individual, like what are we doing?
Absolutely.
Ultimately, that the beauty, the hard part, even for those of us that love to process and have been through different questionings around like how church works and how faith works. I think the thing I come back to is there's this moment where John the Baptist, this fringe character, this like raw, wild prophet, cousin of Jesus, sends some of his followers to Jesus to say, "Are you the one we're waiting for? Or should we expect somebody?"
Meanwhile,
else?
He's in jail.
In jail, like about to be beheaded.
For basically the way of God, and he's like, "Did I screw this whole thing up? I'm about to lose my head."
Yeah,
and I'm just wanting to double check.
Yeah, and Jesus sends the followers back to him with the words, "Well, go tell John what you've seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the poor have good news preached to them." Like, that's the kingdom of God. So from the very beginning, Jesus articulated his kingdom around transformation. It was a transforming kingdom. And so any church that surrenders transformation as possible, I feel like we've missed something.
Absolutely.
And so like holding intention, belonging, and transformation is intriguing to me. Like,
yeah, absolutely. So can I change gears briefly?
Yes.
So the text you chose, it has some intriguing little snippets.
Yeah. We didn't even get to the text, man. We picked Luke 4. I picked Luke 14 as a text.
Yes, which is this story. Yeah, this story about this party and all this stuff. Man who
creates a big party, and it's paralleled in Matthew. If you're unfamiliar with Matthew versus Luke, like two gospel writers, biographers of Jesus, different emphasis in different ways. Similar story. In Matthew, it's a king who's having a wedding banquet for his son. In Luke, it's a man who's just throwing a big party. But both of them invite people, and those people don't show up.
Yeah. So, which obviously connects to this idea of invitation, of, okay, we have a party. This is a good thing. It's got food and all this good things that should draw people, and yet for some reason people don't show up and all this sorts of thing. So I guess I think the part of the message that grabbed onto me was at the end of your message, you started to go into the Matthew account. And this intriguing little snippet at the end.
The Matthew edit to the Matthew cut.
Exactly. And it had a little bit of grit to it in the sense for especially for a church community. Yeah. So could you unpack that again? And maybe even like make it even grittier than it was in the message.
Gritty enough. Yeah, it's super hard to be really gritty when you're a nice person.
Alex and I have been talking about prophetic voices, and I'm just basically saying, come on, lay it on thick. Be more
prophetic. Stop being nice to people. Lay it on
thick.
So the cut in Matthew is there's one guest who is a highways and byways guest. Like both stories say that the people invited didn't come, and implies all of them didn't come. Every single person, that's Jesus like going full like hyperbole. Every single person didn't come. Like you threw a party, nobody came. So you went to find fringe people. And when they came, there wasn't enough people. So you went and got people sleeping under hedges and people that were, we got the Highline Canal. We have a bunch of homeless friends that live under there. Went and grabbed everyone on the absolute fringe and said, come eat with us. And then one of those people who's handed a bunch of wedding clothes, as would be the tradition in the day, just like, I don't really need to wear these. So they just turn up as they are, like not looking like they're at a wedding feast. And so the if you take the story as the church and hospitality, yes, there's the implication that there's potentially some of us that at times are like that person that we sit on the fringe. That the mental image that came to mind, and this is only going to work if you happen to have seen the movie American Hustle, but in this movie, like all of these cops are on this big mission, and the one guy that set it all up, he's pulled off this thing that his boss said wouldn't work, couldn't be done, And so they're all having this big party afterwards, and the boss is like sat on the chair in the corner with this super grumpy look on his face, just like, nah. And that's like the modern illustration to me of the person that clearly doesn't want to be there. And I've probably been that person. No, I've never been that person. I'm too far too upbeat, but maybe I've been that person. Maybe some of you have been that person. Like there's that person that can throw everything off. And that's the implication of the story. You are spoiling the wedding feast for whatever individual reasons you have of your own. There's the potential we do that in church. Like we don't get our own way in a particular way, so we just sit in the corner and pout.
So how do we avoid? So in the context of the term hospitality, which is really what this week was about, there's the whole extravagant hospitality of the father who's throwing the party and all that sort of thing. And so we talked a little bit about that, all that sort of thing. And so then there's this like inhospitable way of coming to the party. Yeah. And so how do we avoid being an inhospitable party attender?
So I think, I think it really comes down to what you believe about the king and his gathering, right? I mean, that seems to be the implication. Like this person has become focused on something else, whatever it is. But it's actually like the struggle with it is it's disrespectful to the king that threw the party and the son for whom the party is thrown for. And in Jesus' language, it suggests that his father is the king and he's the son. So I think that can happen really easily in church life. And I'm always amazed at some people's incredible maturity on these issues. I got together with a guy the other day, and we had Yvonne, one of our pastors, preach the other week. And this guy's been around South Church for years. And he's like, my personal theology is I actually don't think that's a role for women. I don't think it is. But I was there on Sunday and she did a wonderful job unpacking the passage and like it was a great teaching. And my personal theology is, I'm not sure that that's the right role, but that's the community we're part of and I can participate. That's a mature attitude. I was so impressed. Yeah. I was like, I love that. And now I might disagree with him on the theological point or where his emphasis isn't there, but can I disagree with him at all on his way of operating in it? Oh no, not at all. Like what an incredible way to act in a community. And I think he was able to do it because his big picture is how is Jesus glorified. Like that's his interest. Like that's all he cares about really. He's there for the king who's throwing the party and his son for whom it is being thrown. And I think the intriguing thing about the passage is these two groups that are invited, and we're kind of left to imagine how they might interact with each other. Like, how do people that, in the poorer classes of society act with the people from the highways and the byways? How do the people that are desperately trying to make a living in whatever they can act when the freeloaders turn up, when the people that are like just begging on the streets turn up? Like, where's we miss all of that. Like we're just left to imagine. There's the potential that all of those guests there and get there and are like, why is this person here? Why is that person here? Like, they don't belong here. They're more fringe than we are. We thought it was going to be a respectable gathering. We thought we were going to hang out with this guy's rich friends. And now we're slumming it with the people that got invited like as a last afterthought. We have to imagine all of that interaction. For whatever reason, Matthew gives us this one character in the story that can't attend knowing he's there simply out of grace. And the implication of Jesus' story is even the people that were invited in the first place are there by grace. Like they are beneath the king, and the king is welcoming them into his house. They are invited, and it's a privilege. Like, and you only have to know a little bit about royalty or heraldry to know that when a king invites you,
heraldry.
Yeah.
There you go. There's a term that only someone from a monarchy background would.
But when the king invite, like you go back to like stories about what it was to be asked to present yourself to the king or queen. Like, it was fear and trembling. Like a great story that might illustrate this might be the Mephibosheth story from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Like this weird little character that is a Saul who was a king. There's David who succeeds him as king. And in those times, well, when you succeeded someone as king, if you were a different line, you made sure everyone in their line was dead, because you don't want someone coming back and saying, hey, wait, my granddad was king, now I should be king.
Yeah.
And yet Mephibosheth is invited into the court of the king, and it receives grace, even though it's undeserved. Everyone in the story is there for that same reason. Like everyone is beneath the king. And so to come with an attitude of someone else doesn't deserve to be there, that's always a problem. So
you think that that's what's taking place with this particular character? He doesn't put on the clothes because he's like, none of these people deserve to be here anyway, so therefore I'm not going to put in any effort.
We don't have a reason. I mean, I'm guessing at a reason. He doesn't give a reason.
Yeah.
But we can say with certainty, no one is at a level with the king in the story. He's chosen as a character because he is above everybody. And so when he invites, it's always grace. It's never deserved.
Yeah, and there's almost like this particular character, even though, quote unquote, everyone turns down the party,
mm-hmm.
this it's almost like he shows up and he's like, well, the standards have been lowered so much.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
That they probably won't also care that I don't put on the wedding clothes that I've been provided by the king.
Uh-huh.
And basically taking advantage of the grace.
Yeah.
Either way, it's this sort of feeling of, yeah, I mean, I know, like the evidence is showing that I can basically show up however
mm-hmm.
I please, because grace is almost obligatory at this point. And I'm actually just as well off without the wedding clothes as I would be with it.
Yeah, the implication is, like, if we take it and extrapolate it to church community, which is always a little bit dangerous with parables. I mean, we're trying to learn the lessons knowing it's not exactly the same conversation. The implication is the worst thing you can do is to show up and not realize that you're there by grace at the mercy of the king, and come with an attitude of loving respect for that king. Like that to me is like that I should turn up each week and be amazed that the God of grace invited me into this space, that he showed hospitality to me. And that's what I think I love about Paul. Like, and there's lots of things, if I'm honest, I don't love about Paul and the things he says. But his language of I'm the chief of sinners. Because on one hand, you're like, Paul, you're pretty freaking amazing, really. I mean, like, you're doing all the right stuff. And yet he seems to be constantly aware of just how gracious God has been to him. And so for this guy who's been invited by grace, who's been given wedding clothes by grace, and now refuses to put them on.
Yeah.
It's an intentional insult.
So to show up to the party
uh-huh.
and not actually receive the party.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the weird irony of it. He
uh-huh.
also kind of doesn't show up.
Yeah.
Because the point of arriving at this celebration is to receive all of the benefits of the celebration.
Uh-huh.
And so this is a character who's showed up to the party and has not received the party.
Mm.
So he also doesn't show up.
Mm.
Ironically, he's like present but not present.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe the warning for us as we like show up to the things, to the party, to the, whatever, to a Sunday morning gathering, to whatever you want to call it, as showing up in any given moment and then choosing to say, yeah, all the grace that you provided, the love, the over the top forgiveness, all of that stuff. Yeah, I'm not putting that on.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to get from like the person that receives grace to the person that like is more where the Pharisees maybe are a little bit. Like, oh, I deserve to be here now. Like I've been cleaned up. I've been like, yeah. That's a pretty easy journey to make at times. To be constantly aware you're invited in and are no more fit to be invited in than anybody else when it comes to conversation with the king. Is actually a great attitude and probably helps us create environments that feel like home for others.
Yeah.
Like, and that I think is the beauty of like, we all get to participate in that. That ennobles everything that we do. Like I have this, someone said to me on Sunday, how many people do you think you hug on Sunday morning? And I'm like, I don't ever really count. I guess somewhere between like maybe 150, 200 people. And why do I mean, I'm lucky in that I like people, but I do that to try and create that environment. And I do that. That was a thing I learned from Rick Warren, actually. Like, just his assistant followed him around in between church and said he personally hugged 600 people when she counted. And I just loved that about him. And so that it doesn't have to be a physical hug, but I do think if we come with an attitude of God might use me to welcome in both the stranger and the familiar, and I'm going to listen intentionally for his voice and be intentionally welcoming. Because every single one of us is coming home in different ways.
Yeah. Good stuff. So, yeah, come home.
Yeah, and if you're at the party and you're kind of like, meh.
Yeah, I refuse. I'm going to reject all of the potential goodness that God has for me here. Might be time to reevaluate.
And I also, so this is one thing I'd add, like I've had interesting conversations with people around, well, what's the value of like gathering and small talk and all of those different things? Because not everyone likes it as much as I do. And I think you in your most natural form, you kind of like that stuff as well. Like you're naturally pretty extrovert, although less, I think you've said, than you used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I love a room full of people. So I love to like say hi to as many people as possible. Just have those quick conversations. Not everybody loves that. And yet my pitch for Sunday morning and that environment and those spaces like before food bank, before maybe a small group setting, before a class where you get to just mingle. My pitch for them is every deep relationship that I have started with one of those moments. Like it started with just a random interaction that was allowed to become something more. So if you're someone that's like, no, I don't really want to do the surface welcome stuff. I crave the deep. That's great. Like, I love that God has wired you that way. But there's so many opportunities to start something that might become that. And that,
yeah, and
that
I mean, I can hear someone saying, well, yeah, none of the significant relationships that I have started there.
And I wonder if that's true. I mean, they must have started somewhere, right? You always have a first encounter with someone.
Yeah.
Like, so where did they start if not something like that? Like,
someone just introduces them to them.
But where?
Or whatever.
Like, where did it happen? Like, it just, yes, somewhere you meet someone for the first time and you have no idea what that relationship's going to become.
Yeah. And even if that's you and you're like, no, I don't like small talk because it's just too shallow. And that actually tends to be me. Like, I'm not a big small talk guy as much. But that doesn't mean you can't go deep with one person.
Yes, totally.
Whereas you can like interact with 200, 300 people on a Sunday morning. That doesn't mean you can't be the person that represents home.
Oh, yes.
For someone in that space.
One of our staff, like, we're close to running out of time, but what I'll add this, one of our staff who's like less on the introvert, on the extrovert side of the spectrum, we read a book as we were prepping this called Setting the Table. around extreme hospitality. It's a restaurateur's book. And one of the staff said to me, like, I just want to ask, like, if this is the culture you want, do I fit? Because I'm not, like, he wouldn't hire me for his restaurants. And I said, no, that's not what I want you to hear at all. Your capacity is your capacity. Your personality is your personality. But that still doesn't excuse us from an environment like a Sunday morning saying, God, I only have the energy for one interaction this morning. Where should it be? Like, direct me, lead me, speak to me, and use me in your kingdom. And man, that you might have that one interaction and be like, I'm done. I'm ready for a nap. And that's you being you. That's a wonderful gift to the kingdom.
Absolutely.
But like, none of us are exempt from participating in that voice of the Spirit that says, you get to be a conduit for my Spirit. And we need more and more people doing that to be the community that God has for us to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was all
right. Well,
we didn't go an hour, 56 minutes.
Well done, us.
Look at us.
This turned into an hour-long podcast every single week.
If you turned off or skipped to the end.
If you're noticing a trend, we talk about rebranding and we never do. We talk about going shorter and we never do. We basically just lie to you nonstop on this podcast.
Except about Jesus, where we told the truth.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, and give us a rating on.
If we change the name of the podcast, do we get to keep the subscribers we already have? Or do we have to start again?
If we run into a snag there, we may not be rebranding.
Can we just change a word? The formerly known as Guys Drinking Tea podcast or something? We'll do like a Prince type thing.
That's awesome. We'll see. And we'll have to let you be filled with anticipation of what the actual new title will be, because we haven't even totally chosen it yet. We've got some ideas. And I went over to our new studio space, and it's painted and prepped and ready to go. And so we can start moving in there as soon as I can actually lift things. Yep. Thanks for tuning in. We love you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, bye.